each other.
Okay, I think we're live. So really excited to be here today. We've got a panel of 4 fantastic site selection consultants that have all done a lot of work in the industry and played a big role with projects that have made tremendous impacts in our community. So I'm excited to be here with this group, and I'll do some quick introductions, and then we'll go into some questions for the group. So first, I'd like to introduce Tracey Hyatt Bosman, who's Managing Director of the Midwest practice of Biggins, Lacy, Shapiro and Company. She's based in Chicago and has over 20 years of professional experience in the site selection world, with sectors including manufacturing, headquarters, back office, and contact center operations. So a few companies she's done work with include Bristol Myers Squibb, Honeywell, and Colgate-Palmolive. She joined BLS, but before that was with Grubb & Ellis, and before that was with the South Carolina Department of Commerce. So next up is Josh Bays. Josh is a partner with Site Selection Group. He leads the company's industrial practice. Prior to joining Site Selection Group, Josh was with Trammell Crow, for those of you that will remember the real estate company based in Texas. His clients have included Adidas, Amazon, Boeing, and Harley Davidson, just to name a few. Next up is Bob Hess, who's Vice Chairman with Newmark Knight Frank's Global Corporate Services Group, which has more than 1,000 people on that platform. He's the team leader for global business and real estate practice, branded as their global strategy group. He's worked on more than 275 projects on a global basis, and prior to that was with Cushman Wakefield and with Deloitte Spanish Group before that. He's worked with 3M, Nike, Samsung, and ThyssenKrupp, just to name a few. So great experience there. And then Mark Williams, who is just past president of the Site Selectors Guild and is the founder and president of Strategic Development Group. Mark specializes in manufacturing and office facility locations for both large and mid-sized companies in the U.S., as well as multinationals in the chemical, automotive, transportation, distribution, and life sciences sectors. And prior to founding Strategic Development Group, was Chief Development Officer for South Carolina Department of Commerce. So we've got 2 alumni from South Carolina in the group. And closer to home, if we were all sitting in Nashville, Mark spent a good bit of time with Bridgestone, which has made some significant investments in the Nashville region of Tennessee, and we just kind of, I think, finished having a speaker from that group. So excited to have these 4 here today, and look forward to a good conversation. And I think maybe just to start things off, for the folks out there that are watching this, is talk a little bit about how COVID-19 has affected the site selection process, and what your clients are expecting in the current environment. So has there been changes to the timeline expectations, things like that? And maybe Tracey, if you wouldn't mind kicking us off, that'd be great.
Yeah. Well, it won't come as a surprise to any of you listening, joining us today, but we've had to, for example, learn how to move our fieldwork to virtual. So I think that's been the biggest change in the process. We've learned we can do it. We've learned that we can get into the field more quickly doing it virtually. We've learned that it's easier to schedule appointments because you're not limited to the 36, 48 hours that you're in the market. We've learned that we can include a wider range of client representatives on those calls because they don't have to be the ones in the field with us. So that's a positive part of it. Wouldn't want to rely on it entirely. Certainly would not want to rely on it in first-time fieldwork visits. But certainly in those markets where we've had experience, more importantly, where the client may have had more experience, and we're just trying to get a sense of current conditions, it's working quite well. And I think you'll see probably all of us on this call continue to include some of those virtual elements in future fieldwork, even when we've we're able to put COVID in the history books, and really looking forward to that, and return to doing a lot more of it in person. I think we'll still be doing some of it virtually. I think we've learned some pros to that. You also asked what our clients are expecting, and I think they really don't know what to expect. They come to us and they say, so what does this look like right now? Are the economic developers working? Are they, are the governments functioning? Can we get incentives approved? Can we travel? Can you travel? Is anybody going to meet with us if we do travel? All of these. And so we're just, having to let them know that things are moving forward. We're able to get things done, but it's fluid, and we're just going to need you to work with us, and we'll all get there together. But I've really been impressed, actually, with the way the economic development community and the site selection community has responded and found ways to make it work.
Charles, I'll take a shot. Our clients fit into 3 buckets: those that have canceled, those that have postponed, and those that are moving ahead with haste. It's across the board, and there are those that are moving with haste. They're larger companies with longer term decisions, 2 or 3 maybe year build outs. Agree with Tracey on the virtual piece, but we've been out in the field. I wouldn't say nearly as much as we were, but when it gets time to make a few $100 million decision, we're just not going to rely on we have to see it ourselves. So we can talk, I guess, more about what we think is going to happen, but that's what's happening to us right now.
Sure. So the truth testing the site will not change. There's still a need for boots on the ground.
Yeah, and to Mark's point, the projects we've been working on recently have not quite gotten to that point. So they've shortlisted locations, but they have not signed real estate deals, and nor would we encourage them to or advise them to without actually seeing it.
Yeah, one thing that comes to mind, Mark and Tracey, you're 110% agree. But what has been somewhat of a constraint is the availability of municipal people in the municipal city planning, moving things through approvals, permitting. We had a project in Tampa, Florida, where we had 3 finalist buildings. The landlord was nowhere to be found. We had to negotiate the lease in parallel to the incentive. So that's an area that has been impacted by COVID-19. I know a lot of people are changing their jobs, and they're being redeployed to other parts of state and local government. But please keep that core group of people that can move things through in place, because there are people, like Mark said, I totally agree. When they say haste, they mean 3 times as fast, because they're like leaders. They're market leaders. They're opportunistic folks in certain industries.
And I guess along those lines, you kind of, you mentioned some of these folks that are large industrial users, but what sectors are you guys seeing activity in right now? Maybe Josh, if you wouldn't mind starting with that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny, when we went through the economic recession and saw all of the uncertainty that was injected into the marketplace in that time, and it really kind of slowed things down. From our experience this go around, and not saying they're exactly similar, but we've got quite a bit of uncertainty injected into the marketplace. You kind of see those that fall into 2 categories, as Mark was alluding to, those that are moving full speed ahead. For us, that's been a lot of food. We have been fortunate enough to do quite a bit of work in the food industry, and not all food production is alike. We've seen a lot more activity out of those companies where their final products are ending up on grocery store shelves. A lot less from a food service perspective. That's been very active for us, as well as just bulk distribution. Obviously, the shift of the importance on e-commerce. That goes a lot further and deeper than just companies like Amazon that you think of when you think of e-commerce. I mean, it's having a ripple effect through supply chains all across the nation. And so we see quite a bit of activity in that. And, we're starting, now that we're 5 months into this mess, starting to see a lot of consolidation strategies be introduced, right? People have had a chance to assess what's happened over the last 5 months. They feel a little better about whatever their future models are unique to their business than they did 5 months ago. And, we're starting to see people kick around those more comprehensive strategies of reacting to COVID. And so I think we're going to continue to see a lot of consolidations come across collectively all of our desks.
Yeah, I'd like to cite some material that was put out by an organization called the Site Selectors Guild. A few of us are members of that. And the data is pretty relevant. I'm not promoting the organization itself here, but I am kind of, because I think it was spot on. Biotech and life sciences, very active. We have 3 new clients in that area. By the way, diagnostics and therapeutics, anything that's, Project Warp Speed from the federal government. There's money being flowed out there for new manufacturing, advanced manufacturing. Mark could talk about that. We talked about food, transportation, logistics is hot. By the way, they're the small and medium-sized manufacturing, industrial type centers for certain durable goods. By the way, the Economist earlier did a great job laying out durable versus non-durable goods in terms of active sectors. He did a great job. He really highlighted that very well. Software and IT, you think that'd be dead in the water, but this whole issue of going from high-cost centers to low-cost centers, which was there before COVID, is furthering, right? It's advancing, and people are looking around and understanding that, de-densifying, going from tier 1 centers maybe to smaller ones. And I'd like to mention cloud architecture and data centers. Facebook just announced a huge project here in Illinois. That's huge. Look at all this data that we're storing right now. So those are real projects in that whole data center space, including the corporates that are looking at their whole information strategy.
Yeah, Facebook dropped another one that was announced just outside of Nashville as well pretty recently. So I think this week or last week. So the days are blurry. So I guess, as that's staying busy though, and you mentioned IT, how no one said anything about office. So is that completely dead right now?
Well, I'll start. I work for a big office company. I guess the good news is anywhere from 95 to 97% of rents are being paid by corporate occupiers across all the major sectors. Now that changes by retail and hospitality, right? That's a pretty messy situation right now. You know what? It depends on the industry. I hate to say it depends, but it depends on whether it's a first mover tech firm who still is seeking talent and lower cost solutions, maybe looking at a hub and spoke strategy, new business continuity centers outside of the urban cores. They're looking at suburban areas. So, I think that was way down the list as an industry that we thought might have been active, but even our fellow site selectors that thought 31% would see a lot of activity. We have 2 new headquarters projects. I'm so glad to have, those types of projects. Doesn't mean they're going to go fast, though. They want to start 45 days from now, right? That's like Mark said. Doesn't mean they're all going to move fast. I wish they'd start faster. But anyway, that's my response to that question. There's still leasing going on at the short term, but none of these big long-term 10 or 15-year leases. Everybody's very careful about that, Charles.
Okay. I think they were already pretty careful about that. They're, I feel like lease terms have really come down, over the last decade or so. But we're seeing some office as well. For us, it's really been all about life sciences and really non-COVID related life sciences. So we've been seeing a lot of activity from biologics and gene therapy, which is not office. But we've also seen a lot in the fintech sector, for example, and some of the back office functions, and they're going to look different. We just announced Barclays, but I think a lot of groups will probably slow down, as Bob said. You have two forces. So you have people working from home, so maybe we don't need as much office space, but then you have people are going to want to be a little further apart and not sitting on top of each other. So that's going to be a cause for more office space. So, I think we'll definitely be seeing some realignments, and it's really hard to tell, whether there's a greater increase or a pullback of some form, but I think we're guaranteed there will be movement.
Yeah,
we saw a trend before COVID of a trend toward regional headquarters, and we're working on lots of those. And I think that trend's going to continue. Bob and I were in a conversation the other day about Does that mean the emptying of large urban areas? And I don't think it will, but I do think it means more suburban, mid-sized cities. That momentum is going to continue. But let's not forget. I mean, we're in a presidential election year, and the GDP went down 32% on an annualized basis last quarter. So it's just not the prime time for a lot of strategic decision making, or maybe people are going to sit on it a little bit. But one thing Josh said, to get off the track here in terms of food and beverage and certain household items, leisure. We're not a company that gets a lot of RFPs in this area, and I don't know what you all see, but we see a lot of these RFPs in that area. So that's been busy there.
That's great. I guess, in thinking about kind of the audience out there, what can economic development organizations do really to make that transition over to some of the virtual site visits that Tracey, that you talked about earlier? What are some things that that they can do to really get prepared and be thinking about from a virtual perspective? I mean, I don't know that, Tucson sent off a cactus to Amazon, right? I mean, I don't know that a lot of that needs to happen right now, but what are some things you guys think, think the folks in the audience ought to really be thinking about as they start to have to work in a virtual world a lot more?
Well, yeah.
Sorry. Go ahead, Bob.
Yeah. So my first thought on that is, we're all in the client service business. I think maybe there's been even more demand on us as site selectors to think way ahead of our clients in this environment and exceed their expectations. And how do you do that when it's kind of like working through molasses in terms of decision making? So, all the best groups out there have been in front of us. I think it's the first thing is they're in front of us. They're talking, they're conversing. How can we help you? What can we do better? They're putting, they're using drones. They're doing whatever they can to advance our process and make our life easier. That's what we do for our clients. It's what you can do for us right now, all the way down to dedicating people to new industries, making sure their data. By the way, that's the one thing I want to mention is data. I mean, so can you rely on any data right now that's online or on the internet? We're going to need really good empirical business intelligence, and doing surveys locally of your industries and sectors. That's been on a couple projects. That's been invaluable to make us look good in front of our clients, to make you look good.
Yeah, that's the big thing right there is the data, right? Knowing what's going on, because nobody knows what's going on. So what you can share with us is really important. I think from just a technical logistics standpoint, practice, if you're going to have, especially multiple people on a call, on a presentation, practice turning it over to different people. So it doesn't, seem clunky or seem like the first time somebody's done a Zoom call. And it does take a little practice. So I think we're all getting better at it, but I think as a culture, we still have a ways to go in that regard.
I mean, I think what's important about a virtual site visit is helping you imagine what's there. And drones have been mentioned a number of times. And one of the things I have wished in some of the virtual tours we've had recently is I kind of want to fly the drone, or I want to be able to direct where it's going. Like employee interviews, I want to go where I want to go. I don't want to go exactly where you're telling me to go. I want to see what I need to see to get perspective. And so anything that's innovative that can enhance perspective in any of those areas is really important.
I don't feel like I'm sorry, Josh. I was just going to ask the group, and you can start first, so you can throw in the rest of what you want to say there. But I just don't feel like I'm seeing much drone use, and I really thought it would take a fast uptick right now, and maybe it's just the areas we're working, but I just haven't seen it as much as I thought I would.
Yeah, with regard to drone use, I think there's certainly a disparity. Some of the utilities, especially down in the Southeast, are doing a better job, but by and large, I haven't seen a lot at the community level or even the regional level really employ drones as much as they probably should, because it really is good technology. With regard to virtual site visits, I think I forget what one of my colleagues said it a minute ago, is we're not getting deals done through virtual site visits. So the lack of travel at some point in time, it's a bottleneck to the process. And basically what that means is you're never going to completely win a deal with a virtual site visit, but you might find yourself out of the running after a virtual site visit. And so I think people put a lot of pressure on themselves to execute, and I agree with what Tracey said, practice, make sure it's not clunky. But one thing I think everyone needs to remember is everybody's dealing with COVID. We're dealing with COVID. We're all collectively putting way too much pressure on ourselves. At some point in time, dogs are going to bark, children are going to scream. Let's try to mitigate that to the most, but let your personality come through, right? I mean, I'm listening to my kids wrestle in the other room in there, and I'm trying to conduct a very formal panel here, right? We've all got to cut each other slack. And I know site visits or virtual site visits are important. I said why they're important, but at the end of the day, I think it's incumbent upon us to advise our clients to take all this with a grain of salt and not be so serious through this, because we're all facing this together.
Should I go let my kids out of the closet then?
Yeah, there's white noise. I think those white noise machines are absolutely getting sold so they can dull down the sound of kids and dogs in the background. So, I guess as we're kind of thinking about this, and somebody mentioned kind of what do you see, in the future and your crystal balls and around the corner, but what's the expectation right now, I guess, for you guys that based on the activity you're seeing, kind of based on some of the site visits you've done, because I know Mark, you had to go do that. I've had a couple. I mean, what does the world look like over the next, I guess maybe through the end of this year and then probably into next year?
And I don't see corporate America really opening up travel in the near future. And I personally think that's the biggest bottleneck in our industry at the moment. We're traveling as a firm. If our clients want us on a plane, we'll get on a plane. It's as simple as that. And so from my perspective, there's a lot of uncertainty, and I don't think that's drying up anytime soon. Certainly not for the rest of this year. You compound that with an election on top of this, I think it's going to be a lot more of the same for at least the foreseeable future. You're going to have active sectors. You're going to have some that are dead in the water. But the no travel is by far the biggest bottleneck.
Yeah, my comment to this, Charles, is I used to do a lot of hunting when I was younger, not anymore. But it's kind of like clay pigeon shooting with a shotgun. Even I'd still miss quite a bit. But with a rifle with a scope, so you got to know where to aim that rifle right now, and you put a scope on. If you can find the right place to aim, there's activity there. It's very nuanced, and everybody here in SEDC, you're expert business developers and marketers and evaluating information and listening to trends and catching those nuances. So they are active sectors, and there's three mindsets out there. There's a frozen, feared mindset. There's nothing going to go on in the hospitality and some services. They're not going to be doing any planning. They're just trying to survive. And then there's some of the opportunistic type industries out there, like little green shoots coming out of the field. And they're doing planning and scenario planning. And that's what we're seeing right now. It might be a $10,000 study that we're doing, but they want to understand their optionality right now. And that optionality is going to set the stage about whether they can get competitive edge, gain market access, get ahead of somebody, position themselves in the right place. And communities and states have a big role in playing that competitive positioning, whether it's automotive or consumer products or life science. And I can't wait to see you guys bring that type of knowledge and perspective to the table to us. It will help us be better for our clients.
Well, and maybe that. Sorry, go ahead, Mark.
Comments or just listening to Josh and Bob. I don't think anything's going to change much for 6 to 9 months. And as Bob said, there are certain opportunities and sectors that want to get on with a business decision to meet a market. And then there are others that I mentioned earlier that have a longer term horizon, and they're just going to do what they need to do because it's, they don't come online for 3 or 4 years, and that's how it's going to be. But I think whether, it's a bigger company, perhaps like Bob's or smaller like ours or Josh's or Tracey. We have to pivot as we need to where the opportunities are. And that's how I would foresee the economic development community is they have to pivot. They have to find out, they have to revisit their assets, and they have to revisit who loves them for their assets and who doesn't care about their liabilities, and go find those people. But the opportunities are there. I mean, in 2008 and 9, we had great years. How do we have a great year? Well, we were helping companies figure out where to close. I mean, it's not a really fun business, but we pivoted, and people that are going to win are going to pivot. And that's what we have to do. That's what the economic development community has to do.
Yeah, and not just once. This is going to take, I think it's going to be fits and starts. So we're going to see companies try to move forward with something, and then some part of the supply chain is going to go down, and they're going to have to pull back, and schools are going to open, and then they're going to close, and people are going to try to go back to the office, and then the school's going to close, and then they'll have to work from home because the kids are home. And I think there's going to be just a lot of fits and starts for a while, and everybody's just going to have to remain agile. But I do agree, there's things are going to move forward. There's going to be a lot of M&A activity, but just all going to have to kind of write it out.
Yeah, and one thing I won't change for all of us to tell everybody here in the audience is your existing industry and how important that is. Yeah. Look at these Alabama, my good friends in Alabama, the announcements the last few months or two. Holy cows, an electric arc furnace and another $800 million in that automotive facility in northern part of the state. I mean, that's incredible. It's a great time where 80% of your jobs come from existing industry, right? 20% from business attraction. Maybe you want to aim the gun in some of these new areas for business attraction, but wow, I mean, take care of those assets, your portfolio of industries. There's plenty of work there, looking at gaps, helping them survive. Lots and lots of high value activity there for our folks here at SEDC.
Hey, Bob, on that point, I mean, we talk a lot about reshoring, and I think that's where a lot of that may come back, is if a company's global and they decide to consolidate more back in the U.S., it's going to be at their existing facilities. And we've been looking at that, and that's where it's happening. So
and it's not relocating from Asia or China, okay? It's N+1. It's what they won't do over there anymore, that they'll peel out or carve out a line. So, I mean, there's too much hype around reshoring about moving. You're going to move 90 million manufacturing jobs from China. That's how many jobs there are in China, by the way, 90 million. Just 1% of that might be up for grabs for relocation. That's 9 million jobs. Okay, there's some opportunity there, but not relocating all those jobs. It's like, it's a very complex algorithm, right? Global FDI and reshoring and nearshoring. Yeah, there's some seeds there. If you're good with that rifle and that scope, fine, play in that area. But again, don't ignore those existing assets that would play already in that place, right? They'd already be considered by their Asian and European parents in that global supply chain.
I'm painting with a broad brush here, but and I like what Mark said a lot. Because the Southeast, by and large, is the most cost-effective region to produce goods in the United States. When we do, and I use the word when because I think it's inevitable, we do have a wave of consolidation over the next couple of years. Typically, not always, but typically the path of least resistance is to expand if you have capacity at an existing location. The Southeast is set up pretty well for that. And so I think that, circling back to the whole existing industry conversation, specifically looking at it through that lens, that existing industry that's treated well and supported, and if they've got the excess capacity, that could be a larger target for a community than new recruitment, so to speak, and the net effect's the same.
Yeah, seeds of hope. So 2 weeks ago, I got to sit in front of a manufacturer here in Des Plaines, Illinois. I'm not going to say who they are, and they want to shift capacity from Illinois to Texas, Arkansas, or Oklahoma. So there you go. I mean, that stuff is still going on, Charles and everybody, that whole movement from high cost centers to low cost centers. And there's no doubt about everybody here in this region, if you sharpen the knife a little bit, you're well positioned for all of that activity, even without trying to, focus on attraction, right? So,
Charles, can I ask the group a question? Do we have time?
I don't know that I can.
Charles.
Yeah, go for it. Go for it.
Okay.
I want to see who she's going to make struggle.
No, sorry, just real quick. The Southeast has been, a lot of the states have been some of the first to try reopening. And I think I'm kind of curious whether we're all seeing our clients respond positively to that or negatively. Is it considered, hey, they're great, they're business friendly, or is it, too dangerous and not being thoughtful about what's going on in the world? I've actually heard both.
That is a great question.
Good.
I kind of like Josh. Our clients won't get on a plane. I haven't heard any particular opinions on that, but I'm not going to answer your question, Tracey. I'm going to evade it. But what
Figures.
fascinated me about the whole reopening, and then you came back to what you really wanted to hear about, is you have these businesses that have the highest economic impact, and you want those to be the ones that are open and to stay open. And then you have these businesses, no offense to anyone, that have low economic impact, but they have a higher risk of transmission. So what do? You open up all the ones with the high risk and low economic impact. And I never quite understood that, but I'll stop there. I just never did.
Yeah, that's a good point. I do want to mention to the group that I think a lot of people look at all these dashboards for COVID and infections and things of that sort. I'm not the expert on this, but I haven't seen that come up in our current portfolio of assignments where they weight that 50% about whether they're going to go ahead in a project or right. It's still the fundamentals of labor and cost and workforce and infrastructure. Do they have a site that works? Yeah, there's some of these intangibles to look at right now, but the fundamentals have just not changed. They're innovating though, right? I mean, with technology and other types of things, but the fundamentals still exist. So if your fundamentals aren't in place, you're gonna get eliminated, no matter within COVID or not COVID.
True.
So,
Yeah.
Yep.
What do you think, Josh? Any other feedback on that?
Nah, I mean, nothing. That wouldn't be a huge general restatement of what everybody said, right? I go back to a word that I really like that Tracey used, is fluid. What tomorrow brings could be completely different than today. Everyone's feeling their way through this to their best of their ability, and everybody's evaluating this situation completely different. And I think it's going to be fascinating to watch it play out. I think there's a tremendous amount of opportunity for everyone. As Bob said, if you know where to look and you have that rifled approach. If I was doing economic development in the Southeast, I would be a lot more optimistic than some of my partners in economic development in other parts of the country. No doubt about it. And so while there's uncertainty, there's certainly a path forward, and we're going to keep charging forward, everybody in this industry, whether you're on the site selection or economic development end of the table.
And maybe kind of, I guess, to dovetail off of that, I mean, I've certainly seen a shift in kind of our downtown in Chattanooga. What happens, with what happens with downtowns in some of the larger and mid-sized metros? What do you see when it comes to the kind of activity and how important that becomes, or if it diminishes kind of the importance level for your clients? What do you guys see happening there?
Well, I guess if you read all the newspapers and watch all the television shows, it's jobs Armageddon, right? The urban core is dead. It's gone. It's going to morph to something else. That's not, from my perspective, not the case. And I think Mark and I actually had a session on this last week. You can listen to some of the results, but no, there's not a lot of big leasing activity going on at urban cores. But again, what are you talking about? Urban core of Austin or Nashville? There's still cranes everywhere. Or are you talking about the urban core of New York City and Chicago and Seattle and Portland? So what do you mean by the urban core, urban density? By the way, there's urban nodes within suburban areas, which are being looked at heavily because employees don't want to commute, by the way, to the urban core right now, and they're not by and large for some of these large cities. So I'd like to go with Josh said. It is fluid. There's reboarding plans with different strategies for different companies. My own company's not back to work. I haven't been down to the urban core of Chicago since March. and we're getting a lot of work done. So, but I think there's just plenty of urban core centers across the country that are very healthy before, and they will be moving forward. And then there's plenty of areas that have some new challenges, and things like social justice and crime and sustainability, and some of these issues are going to become more real moving forward for sure.
And what he said.
That's because I had to study it for 5 days, Tracey, and report on it last week. Okay.
You did a great job.
Right.
You did more homework than I did, Bob. That's good.
I'm starting to get some questions here from the audience. So one of the questions went back to the comment about surveys and us kind of having local economic developers that are asking kind of their industries. So what types of information are you looking for when it comes to that? If we're out surveying, what are the questions? Who should we be asking?
Go ahead, Josh. No, I insisted on going last time, so I'm going to let you go this time.
The lowest hanging fruit is just what's going on with existing industry, right? Who's cutting back, who's maybe furloughing or laying off workers. What does the profile of that skill set look like? That's pretty, I shouldn't say easy, but that's certainly the lowest hanging fruit from a survey perspective, because that really can sway the needle, right? We've, over the last however many years, been in an expanding, booming economy where you hear about the shortage of technical skill sets. If there's an easy, quick solution to that because of COVID, there's a lot of companies that would quickly take advantage of that if given the opportunity.
Exactly.
Yeah, I'll mention this project in Tampa. It's a 1,000-person collection agency company. By the way, by state law or regulatory issues, they have to be together in a building. They can't work from home. So they were like, wow, collections are pretty important right now, right? I mean, it's kind of a incredible industry. And we couldn't even get an employer interview. I mean, we couldn't do that, right? Because of COVID restrictions. So a lot of the information we asked, Josh nailed it. It's like, what's going on to your wage environment? Who's laid off? Who's going to lay off? I know in Columbus, the Victoria's Secrets, the Limited has had a huge layoff. So if you're a retailer that's on the busy side, it's nice to know, let's say like in, Columbus is not in your region, but it's just an example. There's like 1,500 or 2,000 people. It used to be merchandisers and things of that sort. So talent is still a big driver. It's like still one of the number one critical location factors. Surveys in that area are just going to be really helpful.
Yeah, secondary to that, and I'll emphasize the word secondary, but it's just what's going on in the real estate market. So are prices dropping? Are people filling leases? Are they subleasing? Are they moving out? That sort of thing.
That's a really good point, Tracey, because that's something that I think catches a lot of our clients by surprise. So I exclusively work industrial projects, and this pertains more to the larger markets, right? The Atlantas, the Nashvilles of the world, the Charlottes, etc. But I wouldn't say it's pervasive, but it certainly exists. There's the corporate perception out there that the industrial real estate market has shifted from a landlord's market back to a tenant's market. And some of these active markets, nothing could be further from the truth. I mean, with the prevalence of e-commerce and a lot of other just bulk distribution gobbling up space and attractive markets, the good quality or the availability of good quality industrial space, there's not a glut of that stuff on the market despite us being in a pandemic, and that catches a lot of our clients off guard.
Yeah.
I think I'm getting like the 5-minute warning, but I guess maybe another thing to touch on, talk about what you think kind of economic development organizations and then state departments of commerce need to be thinking about in terms of incentive policy right now. Any takers on that one?
I'll start. I mean, it was interesting to me, kind of the two worlds here. So just prior to the first of the year, 120 months of continuous recovery. In many parts of the country, we saw economic developers having a much tougher job, questions being raised. Why are we doing this? Why are we offering incentives? What's the point? We're at full employment. People are complaining. Fast forward 3 months. Why aren't we doing this? Maybe we should do it faster. Maybe we should do it better. It's just a big transition. And so I think and we've all been watching this, I think, through our careers, there's these cycles. And so we've hit a big cycle. We've hit a big bump. And as we come out of it, incentive programs will be adjusted, but they always need to be adjusted to A, influence an outcome, and B, generate a return for the economic development or utility or whoever's offering them. I mean, that's what it has to be. And so it has to attract and it has to do that. The other interesting thing that others alluded to related to workforce, what does training look like here? What are we doing with all these people? How do we leverage that? And this is, I think, an economic development, a state incentive, local economic development initiative. So I see the perception of economic developers before COVID is somewhat in question by none of us, by the way, by none of us. And now I think it's paramount is we need a little guidance as to how to drag their communities and states out of this. And what is the latest iteration of incentive policies, training policies, targeting policies that in this new world and this new pivot, how do we pivot to make it work? So that's going to be exciting to see.
Yeah, and Mark, I'd like to quickly say it's going to be hard for them to make policies, right? Because we said we're still in the third inning, so that's a big ask. That's a big lift that you're asking for, but definitely should be doing scenario planning. And here's one for you, like work from home. In the past, government agencies, including the agencies that award economic incentives, have been reluctant to allow like telework positions to qualify for incentives. This was like a typical work arrangement. The transition from office building to home office, what is that going to look like? It's forced a lot of governments and economic developers to rethink this policy and adapt to the new reality of employment during at least this time. And COVID-19 is not going away in a few months. So you got to think about these teleworking employees for incentives.
It's not just going forward either, right? So you've got a lot of existing agreements out there, and people are trying to figure out what to do with those because they require the employees to be on site to count towards the company's target. And now they're not only not on site, they could potentially be in a different jurisdiction or even a municipal jurisdiction or even a different state. Mm-hmm. And what does that mean? And I think that's, and Charles, you mentioned this when we were talking the other day, I think that's really the hardest thing that we're seeing. Everybody's trying to figure out how we're going to address that with existing contracts. Beyond that, there's are we going to hit our job targets? Are we going to hit our investment targets? And we saw that with 2007, 2008. And I'm seeing now what we saw then, which is that the communities and states are really doing their best to work with the companies on that front.
Yeah, we had a project not cancel, but go on hold last week because the CFO won't sign on the bottom line for a 5-year job projection. Like, who would sign on the bottom line for that?
Who knows?
Yeah. So if your policies are still at the state and local level to say you got to fill out this matrix for 5 years, I mean, that's a pretty heavy lift right now for a lot of our clients. So
5 years is 5 years is a long time when, 7 months ago, nobody knew what COVID-19 was. And you talk about working from home, and pretty much I think everybody who's showing up on the screen is working from home right now. So the transition has definitely happened. The transition has definitely happened, and it is a strange world for sure. And so I think I know it's about 6 o'clock, and for my colleagues out there that are also at home and certainly are not in Nashville, I can tell you that Tootsie's misses you. If you don't know what that is, then I'm sorry. And I would just say that Nashville and the state of Tennessee also misses you. And so we're sorry that we couldn't all be together. And I do want to I want to thank Josh and Mark and Bob and Tracey for joining us. I think this has been a good session. I hopefully, we know that the world is upside down, and so I think any insight that you guys have been able to bring is really valuable from a local economic development perspective, but hopefully also for our colleagues at the state when we're talking about things like the incentive policy issues that are out there. And I'll just put a plug in for Rivers Rutherford, who's up next after us. He's a brilliant songwriter who's got some great songs out there. So hope everybody else can stick around. But I think otherwise, I think we're out of time. So thank you all very much. Greatly appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Take care.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.